The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corridors of Naval Base San Diego, casting harsh shadows on the polished linoleum floors. Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her maintenance badge one more time, feeling the familiar weight of judgment that seemed to follow her wherever she went. At 28, she had learned to keep her head down, her tools sharp, and her mouth shut. But today felt different. Today, she could sense something brewing in the salt-tinged air of the base. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's combat boots echoed against the concrete as she made her way toward the engineering bay. Her coveralls were pristine, pressed to military standards, but she noticed how other sailors seemed to look right through her. The maintenance badge on her chest might as well have been a scarlet letter. In the rigid hierarchy of naval life, maintenance personnel occupied a unique position, essential but invisible, critical but somehow lesser in the eyes of those who had never held a wrench or troubleshot a failing system at 3 in the morning. The morning briefing had been particularly brutal. Commander Richards, a career officer who had never seen real combat, had made his usual rounds of condescending remarks about support personnel and their simple responsibilities. Sarah had bitten her tongue so hard she tasted copper. If only he knew what those hands had done, what those eyes had seen in the darkness of foreign shores. As she entered the engineering compartment, the familiar sounds of machinery filled her ears. The steady thrum of generators, the hiss of hydraulic systems, the distant clang of metal on metal. It was a symphony she knew by heart. But today, that symphony was interrupted by something else. Laughter. Not the good-natured laughter of camaraderie, but the sharp, cutting laughter of mockery. "Look who's here," sneered Petty Officer Martinez, a communications specialist who had never met a regulation he couldn't bend. "Our little grease monkey. How's the glamorous world of wrench-turning treating you today, Chen?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that reaction only fed the beast. "Just here to do my job, Martinez. Same as always." "Right, your job," Martinez continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Chen, what's it like knowing that while the rest of U.S. are handling real military operations, you're down here playing with nuts and bolts? Must be nice having such simple responsibilities." The group around Martinez chuckled, a sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. These were sailors she had served alongside for months, men and women who should have understood the brotherhood of service. But rank and specialty created invisible barriers, and Sarah had learned to navigate them with the same precision she used to navigate enemy territory. "Everyone's job matters," Sarah replied quietly, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her chest. "The ship doesn't run without every part working together." "How philosophical," Martinez shot back. "The maintenance philosopher. Maybe you should write a book about it. Deep thoughts from the tool shed or something." More laughter erupted from the group. Sarah noticed how they positioned themselves, a semicircle that felt more like a tribunal than a casual gathering. Their body language spoke of pack mentality, of sharks sensing blood in the water. She had seen this behavior before, in different contexts, under different skies. The uniforms changed, but human nature remained remarkably consistent. Sarah's hands remained steady as she began unpacking her tools. Each wrench, each gauge, each diagnostic device had its place. Organization was survival. Precision was life. These were lessons learned not in training manuals, but in the crucible of real-world operations, where mistakes measured themselves in body counts rather than demerits. "You know what I don't understand," Martinez continued, apparently not finished with his performance for the crowd. "How someone ends up in maintenance. I mean, what kind of person settles for that? Were you just not smart enough for a real rating? Not tough enough for the real Navy?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a spent round. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her chest, where beneath the maintenance badge, another piece of metal rested against her skin. The weight of it was familiar, comforting even. A reminder of who she really was, of what she had accomplished in the darkness where few dared to tread. But that was a secret she carried like a scar visible to her alone, hidden from a world that wouldn't understand. The maintenance badge was her cover, her disguise, her way of blending into the background while she recovered from wounds that couldn't be seen on any medical chart. Some people, Sarah said carefully, end up exactly where they're supposed to be. The answer wasn't what Martinez expected. He had been fishing for weakness, for signs of the kind of insecurity that would make for better entertainment. Instead, he found something that made him uncomfortable, a quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from someone who should have been, by all accounts, beneath his notice. "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Martinez muttered, but his tone had lost some of its earlier venom. Something in Sarah's eyes had shifted, a flicker of something that made him take an unconscious step backward. As the group began to disperse, Sarah returned to her work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the path that had led her here, to this moment, to this carefully constructed facade. The maintenance badge was more than just a job assignment. It was a shield, a way of hiding in plain sight while she pieced together the fragments of a life interrupted by service to country and causes that existed in the shadows. The irony wasn't lost on her. These sailors, these people who looked down on her chosen role, had no idea that their dismissal was actually a form of protection. For them, and for her, the afternoon sun streamed through the porthole windows of the mess hall, casting long golden rectangles across the worn tables where sailors gathered for their midday meal. Sarah sat alone, as had become her habit, picking at a tray of food that might have been edible under different circumstances. The isolation wasn't accidental, it was strategic. In her line of work, both past and present, blending into the background was more than just a skill. It was survival. At a table across the room, Martinez continued his performance from the morning, regaling his audience with exaggerated stories about maintenance personnel and their supposed incompetence. Sarah caught fragments of his monologue over the general din of conversation, each word designed to diminish and demean. She had heard variations of this story countless times, in different languages from different mouths, but the intent was always the same: to establish hierarchy through humiliation. "I'm telling you," Martinez was saying, his voice carrying further than it should have, "some people just aren't cut out for real military work. They end up in maintenance because they can't handle the pressure of actual operations. It's like a participation trophy. Everyone gets to wear the uniform, but not everyone earns the right to call themselves a real sailor." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The comment hit closer to home than Martinez could have possibly known. Real military work. If only he understood what that phrase actually meant. If only he knew about the nights she had spent crawling through enemy compounds. The precision required to disable security systems, while hostile forces slept meters away. The split-second decisions that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. But that was the point, wasn't it? The most effective operations were the ones that never made it into official records. The most successful operators were the ones whose names never appeared in commendation ceremonies or newspaper articles. They were ghosts, shadows, myths that lived in the spaces between official narratives and classified documents. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, where the outline of the seal Trident pressed against her skin beneath the fabric of her uniform. She had worn it for so long now that its absence would have felt strange, like missing a limb or forgetting how to breathe. The Trident wasn't just a symbol, it was a covenant, a promise, a reminder of oaths taken in rooms that officially didn't exist. The path to earning that Trident had been unlike anything the Navy's official training programs could have prepared her for. It had begun with a conversation that never happened, with a recruiter who had no official title, in an office that existed in the gray space between military branches and civilian agencies. The kind of conversation that started with psychological evaluations and ended with a handshake that bound her to secrecy for life. Training had been brutal in ways that went beyond physical endurance. They had broken her down to component parts and rebuilt her into something that could function in the spaces where traditional military doctrine fell apart. Urban warfare, asymmetric combat, psychological operations. These were courses that didn't appear in any official curriculum, taught by instructors whose names were redacted from every document that mentioned their existence. The first deployment had been to a country that officially didn't host American military personnel. The mission parameters were simple in concept, impossibly complex in execution. Infiltrate, gather intelligence, neutralize threats, extract without leaving evidence of American involvement. Success was measured not in territory taken or enemies killed, but in the complete absence of any proof that American operators had ever been present. Sarah had excelled in ways that surprised even her instructors. Her natural aptitude for mechanical systems translated seamlessly into the technical aspects of covert operations. She could disable alarm systems, crack safes, and jury-rig explosives with the same precision she now applied to maintaining naval equipment. But more than that, she had displayed an almost preternatural ability to disappear into her surroundings, to become functionally invisible even in hostile territory. The second deployment had been to Southeast Asia, where American interests conflicted with regional politics in ways that required solutions that couldn't be achieved through traditional diplomatic channels. Sarah had spent 6 months living under deep cover, maintaining her position as a maintenance technician at a civilian harbor while gathering intelligence on arms, trafficking operations that threatened American naval vessels in the region. It was during that deployment that she had earned the Trident in a ceremony that took place in a windowless room, with no witnesses beyond her commanding officer and a chaplain who had been sworn to secrecy. The traditional Navy SEAL training at Bud A's had been waived in favor of her specialized preparation, but the oath she took was the same one that had bound generations of naval special operations personnel. The third deployment had been the one that changed everything. The mission that had brought her here, to this mess hall, to this carefully constructed cover identity, to this life of deliberate invisibility. It had been in a country that straddled the line between ally and adversary, where American interests required the kind of precision that could only be achieved by operators who officially didn't exist. The mission had gone wrong in ways that weren't anyone's fault and everyone's fault simultaneously. Intelligence had been compromised, extraction routes had been burned, and Sarah had found herself in the position of having to make choices that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The kind of choices that required her to prioritize mission success over personal safety, American interests over individual survival, the needs of the many over the needs of the few. She had completed the mission, but at a cost that couldn't be measured in dollars or casualty reports. The kind of cost that showed up in sleepless nights and sudden panic attacks, in the way shadows moved differently and crowds felt like threats waiting to materialize. The kind of cost that required a different kind of healing, a different kind of recovery. The maintenance assignment had been her idea. A way to stay active, to maintain her security clearance, to contribute to the mission while she processed experiences that couldn't be shared with therapists or support groups. The work was familiar, comforting in its precision and predictability. But more than that, it allowed her to hide in plain sight, to be invisible in the way that had kept her alive in places where visibility meant death. Martinez's laughter echoed across the mess hall, pulling Sarah back to the present moment. She looked at her barely touched meal and made a decision that would have consequences none of them could have anticipated. The afternoon brought with it a shift in the base's rhythm, that subtle change in energy that seasoned military personnel learned to recognize like sailors reading weather patterns. Sarah felt it in her bones as she made her way through the corridors toward the communications center, where a routine maintenance check on the base's primary server array had been scheduled for weeks. The communications center was the nerve center of Naval Base San Diego, a hub of activity that connected the base to fleet operations across the Pacific. Banks of monitors displayed real-time data from vessels at sea, satellite feeds from strategic locations, and encrypted communications. Channels that carried intelligence between command centers and operational units. It was, in many ways, the kind of facility that Sarah had learned to navigate in her previous life: high security, high stakes, and utterly dependent on the reliable functioning of complex technical systems. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed the unusual presence of senior staff. Commander Richards stood near the main console, his face creased with the kind of concern that suggested something more significant than routine operations. Beside him, Captain Morrison, the base's executive officer, was engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with the communications officer on duty. "Ma'am," the security guard at the checkpoint said, consulting his clipboard. "You're here for the scheduled maintenance on the server array?" "That's correct," Sarah replied, presenting her identification and work order. "Routine diagnostic and system optimization. Should take about 4 hours." The guard processed her credentials with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had performed the same task thousands of times. But Sarah noticed something in his demeanor, a heightened alertness that suggested the base's security posture had been elevated. Her instincts, honed by years of operating in hostile environments, began to catalog details that might prove relevant. Additional security personnel at secondary checkpoints. Restricted access to certain sectors. Communications personnel working extended shifts. The subtle signs of an organization preparing for something significant. Something that required all systems to function at peak efficiency. "You're cleared for access to server room C," the guard said, returning her identification. "Please maintain your escort requirements and report any anomalies immediately." Sarah nodded and made her way deeper into the communications center. The server room was a cathedral of technology, rows of humming equipment that processed terabytes of data every second. The familiar smell of ozone and heated electronics filled her nostrils, a scent that had become as comforting as coffee or fresh air. This was her element, the intersection of mechanical precision and strategic importance that had defined her career in both official and unofficial capacities. She began her work methodically, running diagnostic routines on each server cluster, while monitoring system performance in real time. But her attention was divided. Through the reinforced glass windows of the server room, she could see the increased activity in the main communications bay. Officers moved with purpose, their body language suggesting urgency without panic, the controlled intensity of professionals responding to developing situations. It was while she was deep in the diagnostic routine for the primary communications server that she overheard the conversation that would change everything. "The intelligence is solid," Captain Morrison was saying, his voice carrying through the ventilation system that connected the server room to the main communications bay. "We have confirmation of hostile movement in the sector. Fleet Command wants all assets on standby." "What about the maintenance personnel?" another voice asked Commander Richards, his tone carrying the same dismissive quality that had characterized his earlier comments. "Do we need to clear them from sensitive areas?" "Standard protocol," Morrison replied. "But the server maintenance is critical. We can't afford any communication failures if this escalates. The technician has the appropriate clearance." Sarah's hands continued their work automatically, but her mind was processing the implications of what she had heard. Hostile movement. Fleet assets on standby. The kind of language that preceded operations she had once been intimately familiar with. The kind of situation that required the seamless coordination of intelligence, communications, and tactical response. She accessed the server's activity logs, ostensibly as part of her routine maintenance, but actually searching for patterns that might provide additional context. What she found was revealing. Encrypted communications traffic had increased by 400% over the past 48 hours. Data packets were being routed through secure channels that indicated direct communication with Special Operations Command. Most telling of all, the server array was processing authentication requests for personnel with security clearances that existed in the gray space between military branches and civilian agencies, the kind of clearances that she had once possessed, the kind of operations that she had once participated in, the kind of situations that required operators who could function in the spaces where traditional military doctrine proved inadequate. Sarah's pulse quickened as she recognized the familiar patterns. This wasn't just fleet movement or routine patrol operations. This was something that required the kind of precision and secrecy that defined special operations. The kind of mission that would require technical expertise, operational flexibility, and the ability to function under extreme pressure. She continued her maintenance work, but her mind was already shifting into a different mode. The careful invisibility that had characterized her recent months was giving way to something else. A recognition that her unique skill set might be needed, that her carefully constructed cover might be about to become irrelevant. As she worked, Sarah became aware of another presence in the communications center. Admiral Patricia Hawthorne, the base commander, had arrived and was being briefed on the developing situation. Sarah had only seen the Admiral from a distance, but her reputation preceded her. A career naval officer who had risen through the ranks during some of the Navy's most challenging operations, Admiral Hawthorne was known for her strategic thinking, her operational effectiveness, and her ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. But more than that, Admiral Hawthorne was known for her ability to recognize talent, regardless of where it might be hiding. She had a reputation for seeing beyond rank and specialty to identify the capabilities that could make the difference between mission success and failure. As Sarah completed her diagnostic routine, she sensed that the careful balance she had maintained for months was about to be disrupted. The storm that had been gathering on the horizon was about to make landfall, and with it would come the kind of scrutiny that her cover identity might not be able to withstand. The maintenance badge on her chest suddenly felt heavier, more significant. But beneath it, the sealed Trident seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, a reminder that some identities, once earned, could never truly be discarded. The afternoon was about to become much more complicated. As Sarah completed her final diagnostics and prepared her equipment for departure, she could feel the weight of Admiral Hawthorne's presence in the communications center. The careful invisibility that had protected her for months was beginning to crack, and she sensed that the evening would bring conversations that could change everything. Sarah's instincts had been correct. As she finished her work in the communications center and secured her equipment, she noticed Admiral Hawthorne lingering near the main console, occasionally glancing in her direction. The afternoon's routine maintenance had taken on an entirely different significance, and Sarah understood that her carefully maintained cover was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The evening brought with it an electric tension that seemed to permeate every corner of Naval Base San Diego. Rather than returning to her quarters as usual after completing her maintenance duties, Sarah found herself drawn to the observation deck that overlooked the harbor. The sight of naval vessels preparing for deployment always stirred something deep within her, a combination of pride, nostalgia, and an almost physical need to be part of something larger than herself. 3 destroyers were taking on supplies with unusual urgency. Deck crews worked under floodlights, their movements choreographed with the precision of a ballet performed at double speed. Sarah could read the signs as clearly as if they were printed in bold letters: expedited deployment, classified destination, mission parameters that required the kind of flexibility that came with special operations support. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Beautiful sight, isn't it? A voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find Admiral Hawthorne approaching, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. The Admiral's presence was commanding without being intimidating, authoritative, without being cold. She moved with the confidence of someone who had earned her position through competence rather than politics. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, coming to attention. Always impressive to see the fleet preparing for operations. Admiral Hawthorne moved to stand beside her at the railing, looking out at the harbor activity. "You know, I've been reviewing personnel files today. Interesting reading. Especially the files of people who might not be exactly what they appear to be." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Ma'am, tell me, Lieutenant Chen, what do you think of when you see those ships preparing for deployment? Do you see machinery that needs maintenance, or do you see something else?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah understood that this was a moment that would define everything that followed. The careful balance she had maintained for months was tilting, and she had to decide whether to try to maintain her cover or to trust in something that felt increasingly inevitable. "I see," Sarah said carefully, "vessels that are about to carry sailors into harm's way. I see equipment that needs to function perfectly because lives depend on it. I see a mission that requires every component to work together seamlessly, regardless of whether those components are mechanical or human." Admiral Hawthorne nodded slowly. "That's an interesting perspective for a maintenance technician. Very comprehensive. Every job has its own way of looking at the bigger picture, ma'am." "Indeed." The Admiral turned to face Sarah directly. "I understand you've been having some challenges with certain members of your unit. Petty Officer Martinez, for instance." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. "Nothing I can't handle, Admiral." "I'm sure you can handle it," Admiral Hawthorne said. "The question is whether you should have to. You see, I've been in the Navy for 26 years, and I've learned to recognize when someone is underutilized, when their current assignment doesn't fully reflect their capabilities." The conversation was moving into territory that Sarah had hoped to avoid. She had constructed her cover identity carefully, but she was beginning to understand that Admiral Hawthorne saw through carefully constructed facades as easily as reading morning reports. "I'm satisfied with my current assignment, ma'am," Sarah said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Are you?" Admiral Hawthorne asked. "Because from what I can see, you're like a Formula One driver who's been asked to pilot a golf cart. Technically proficient, but not exactly operating at your full potential." Sarah felt something inside her chest tighten. The metaphor was more accurate than the Admiral could have possibly known. For months, she had been operating at a fraction of her true capabilities, maintaining systems that she could optimize in her sleep, solving problems that barely registered as challenges. "Sometimes," Sarah said carefully, "people need time to recalibrate, to find their footing after difficult assignments." "Difficult assignments," Admiral Hawthorne repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe it. Tell me, Lieutenant, what do you know about the situation that's developing in the South China Sea?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Not because she didn't know about the situation. Her access to the communication systems had given her more intelligence than most personnel on the base, but because she wasn't sure how much the Admiral knew about her knowledge. "I'm aware of increased fleet activity," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Seems like something that requires careful attention." "Careful attention," Admiral Hawthorne said. Another interesting turn of phrase. "You know, the intelligence reports suggest that this situation is going to require very specialized skills, technical expertise combined with operational flexibility. The kind of skill set that's not exactly common in the regular Navy." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The Admiral was clearly leading somewhere, And Sarah had the distinct impression that her carefully maintained cover was about to become irrelevant. "I understand there are specialists available for those kinds of operations," Sarah said. "There are," Admiral Hawthorne agreed. "But sometimes the best specialists are the ones who aren't immediately obvious. The ones who've learned to blend in, to work effectively while maintaining operational security. The ones who understand that sometimes the most important work is the work that no one else knows about." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Admiral wasn't just speculating, she knew. Somehow, someway, Admiral Hawthorne had seen through the maintenance badge to the person beneath it. The question was how much she knew, and what she intended to do with that knowledge. "Admiral," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil. In her mind, "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting," Admiral Hawthorne said, "that tomorrow morning, you might want to consider wearing your full dress uniform. All of it. Every ribbon, every commendation, every insignia that you've earned. Because I have a feeling that the situation we're facing is going to require all hands on deck. And I mean all hands." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her chest, where the seal trident rested beneath her uniform. The gesture was subtle, but Admiral Hawthorne noticed it. Of course she noticed it. "I think," the Admiral continued, "that it's time for certain people to stop hiding their light under a bushel. Time for the Navy to make use of all the assets at its disposal, regardless of what their current job description might say." The implication was clear. Admiral Hawthorne knew about the Trident, knew about Sarah's real background, and was preparing to bring her back into the operational fold. The question was whether Sarah was ready to abandon the carefully constructed invisibility that had protected her for months. "Ma'am," Sarah said, "if I may ask, how did you know?" Admiral Hawthorne smiled. "Lieutenant, when you've been in the Navy as long as I have, you learn to read between the lines. Security clearances, assignment histories, medical records, they all tell a story if you know how to read them. And your story is particularly interesting." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The weight of maintaining her cover had been more exhausting than she had realized. But at the same time, returning to operational status meant confronting aspects of herself that she had been trying to process and heal. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," Admiral Hawthorne said, "we prepare for what's coming. And tomorrow morning, we have a conversation about how someone with your particular skill set might contribute to the mission at hand. A conversation that might require you to be completely honest about who you are and what you're capable of." As the Admiral walked away, Sarah remained at the railing, looking out at the harbor. The ships continued their preparations, and she could feel her own internal preparations beginning. The maintenance badge had served its purpose, but the seal trident was calling her back to a different kind of service. The storm was about to break, and Sarah Chen was about to remember who she really was. She spent the rest of the evening walking the base, processing the Admiral's words and preparing herself mentally for what morning might bring. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of operations past and missions yet to come. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that often preceded significant events, exactly as Admiral Hawthorne had predicted. Sarah stood in her quarters, staring at the uniform hanging in her closet, not the maintenance coverall she had worn for months, but her dress blues, complete with the ribbons and commendations that told the story of a naval career that few people knew existed. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the uniform. It had been so long since she had worn it that the fabric felt foreign against her skin. But more than that, putting on the dress blues meant stepping back into an identity that she had carefully suppressed, embracing aspects of herself that she had been trying to heal and integrate. The ribbons were a catalog of operations that officially had never happened. The Navy Cross for actions in a country that the United States had never officially entered. The Silver Star for an operation that had prevented a terrorist attack that the public had never known was planned. The Purple Heart for wounds sustained in a firefight that had never appeared in any casualty reports. But it was the final addition that made her pause. The Seal Trident, that distinctive golden symbol that represented membership in one of the most elite military units in the world. She had worn it hidden beneath her maintenance badge for months, but now she was being asked to display it openly, to acknowledge publicly what she had worked so hard to keep secret. The walk to Admiral Hawthorne's office felt like a journey between worlds. Sarah passed familiar corridors where she had been invisible for months, but now she could feel the weight of stares, the subtle shift in how people reacted to her presence. The dress blues commanded a different kind of attention, a different kind of respect. The Admiral's aide, a young ensign who had never paid Sarah any attention during her maintenance duties, now stood at attention as she approached. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice carrying a newfound formality, "the Admiral is expecting you." Admiral Hawthorne's office was a study in controlled chaos. Charts covered one wall, displaying fleet positions and intelligence assessments. Multiple screens showed real-time data from various sources, and the Admiral herself was engaged in what appeared to be a secure video conference with officials whose faces Sarah couldn't quite make out. "I'll need to call you back," Admiral Hawthorne said into the secure phone. "My specialist has arrived." Sarah stood at attention as the Admiral ended her call and turned to face her. The expression on Admiral Hawthorne's face was one of satisfaction, as if seeing Sarah in her proper uniform confirmed something that had been suspected but not proven. "Much better," the Admiral said. "Now I can see who I'm really talking to. Please sit." Sarah took the offered chair, conscious of how different this conversation felt from their previous encounter. The maintenance badge had been a shield, a way of deflecting attention and avoiding scrutiny. The dress blues, with their array of ribbons and the prominent Seal Trident, were a declaration of capability and experience. "I've been reviewing your file," Admiral Hawthorne began, "and I have to say, it makes for fascinating reading. Although, I suspect the most interesting parts are the ones that have been redacted." Sarah nodded. "That's typically the case with special operations personnel, ma'am." "Indeed." The Admiral pulled up a classified document on her computer screen. "What I can see is impressive enough. Naval Special Warfare Training, advanced technical certifications, multiple deployments to areas that require significant security, clearances. But what I find most interesting is the gap in your service record. 6 months of medical leave, followed by a request for assignment to maintenance duties." Sarah's jaw tightened. The gap in her service record represented the darkest period of her life, when the cumulative effects of special operations deployments had finally caught up with her. Post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, and the kind of moral injury that came from making impossible choices in impossible situations. "Sometimes," Sarah said carefully, "people need time to process their experiences, to find ways to continue serving effectively. And sometimes," Admiral Hawthorne replied, "they need to be reminded that their country still needs their unique skills, that running away from who they are doesn't ultimately serve anyone." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had told herself that the maintenance assignment was temporary, a way of staying active while she healed. But the Admiral's blunt assessment forced her to confront the possibility that she had been hiding from more than just public scrutiny. "Ma'am," Sarah said, "with respect, I wasn't running away. I was trying to find a way to serve that didn't require me to." "To what?" Admiral Hawthorne interrupted. "To use the skills that cost you so much to develop? To operate in situations that require the kind of expertise that you've spent years acquiring." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the Admiral's words. The truth was more complicated than either hiding or serving. She had been trying to find a way to integrate her experiences, to be useful without being consumed by the demands of special operations. "The situation in the South China Sea," Admiral Hawthorne continued, Requires someone with your particular combination of technical skills and operational experience. Intelligence suggests that we're dealing with a threat that can't be addressed through conventional military response. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of threat? The kind that requires infiltration, technical sabotage, and the ability to operate independently in hostile territory. The kind that requires someone who can think like an engineer and fight like a SEAL. The description was like a key turning in a lock. Sarah felt something inside her chest loosen, a recognition that she had been designed for exactly this kind of challenge. The maintenance work had been safe, predictable, controllable. But it had also been a denial of who she really was. What would the mission parameters be? Sarah asked and immediately knew that she had crossed a line. The question itself was an acknowledgement that she was considering returning to operational status. That depends, Admiral Hawthorne said, on whether you're ready to stop being a maintenance technician and start being a Navy SEAL again. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah understood that this was the moment of decision, the point where she either committed to returning to her true identity or continued the fiction that had protected her for months. But before she could respond, the Admiral's phone rang. The caller ID showed urgent SecDef, and Admiral Hawthorne's expression immediately shifted to one of focused attention. "This is Admiral Hawthorne," she said, answering the call. "Yes, sir." "I understand." "Yes, sir, I have someone who can handle that." "How long do we have?" Sarah watched the Admiral's face grow increasingly grave as the conversation continued. Whatever was happening in the South China Sea, it was escalating rapidly. "Understood, sir." "We'll be ready." Admiral Hawthorne ended the call and turned back to Sarah. "It seems the decision has been made for us. The situation has escalated beyond what conventional forces can handle. I need someone who can be operational within 12 hours. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once defined her life. The maintenance badge had been a temporary refuge, but the SEAL Trident was calling her back to the work she had been born to do. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, and knew that her months of hiding were about to come to an end. Urgency in the Admiral's voice made it clear that there was no time for hesitation. "Report to Conference Room Alpha 7 in 30 minutes. Full dress uniform with all decorations. It's time for some people to see exactly who you really are." As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she understood that the careful balance between her two identities was about to shift dramatically, and there would be no going back to the safety of invisibility. The briefing room that Admiral Hawthorne led Sarah to was unlike any space she had seen on Naval Base San Diego. Located 3 levels below the main administrative building, it was accessed through a series of security checkpoints that required biometric identification and specialized clearances. The room itself was a study in controlled paranoia, soundproofed walls, electromagnetic shielding, and communication equipment that existed in the gray space between military and intelligence operations. But it was the people in the room that made Sarah's breath catch. Commander James Morrison, whom she recognized from his official capacity as the base's executive officer, sat at the head of a polished conference table. Beside him, 2 civilians in expensive suits that screamed intelligence community. And in the corner, a figure that made Sarah's heart skip, Captain Michael Torres, her former commanding officer from Special Operations, a man she hadn't seen since her last deployment. "Lieutenant Chen," Captain Torres said, rising from his chair. His voice carried the weight of shared history, of operations that had bonded them in ways that civilian life could never replicate. "It's good to see you again." Sarah came to attention, but Torres waved her to an informal posture. "At ease, Sarah. We're all friends here." Admiral Hawthorne took her position at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, as I indicated, Lieutenant Chen has been serving in a maintenance capacity here on base. But as you can see from her actual service record, she brings a unique set of skills to our current situation. One of the civilians, a woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw, spoke up. "Ms. Chen, I'm Director Patricia Walsh, CIA. I've been briefed on your previous work with joint operations. Impressive record." Sarah nodded acknowledgement, but remained silent. In rooms like this, it was often better to listen than to speak until you understood the full scope of what was being discussed. Captain Torres activated a large screen that displayed a satellite image of the South China Sea. "The situation is this," he began. 48 hours ago, 3 Chinese naval vessels took up position around a disputed island chain. On the surface, this looks like another territorial dispute. But intelligence suggests something much more significant is happening. The image shifted to show close-up photographs of the Chinese vessels. Sarah's trained eye immediately spotted details that most observers would miss: modified equipment configurations, additional antenna arrays, and what appeared to be specialized technical equipment that didn't match standard naval operations. "Electronic warfare platform," Sarah said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "They're not just claiming territory, they're establishing a forward electronic surveillance post." Director Walsh smiled approvingly. "Exactly. And the location they've chosen gives them the ability to monitor all American naval communications in the region. Every ship movement, every operation, every classified transmission." Admiral Hawthorne leaned forward. "The conventional military response would be to position our own vessels in the area and begin a diplomatic standoff. But that would take weeks to resolve, and by then, the intelligence damage would be catastrophic. So you need someone to make the problem go away without creating an international incident," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "We need someone," Captain Torres confirmed, "who can infiltrate the installation, neutralize the electronic warfare capabilities, and extract without leaving evidence of American involvement. Someone who can handle the technical aspects and the operational challenges." Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had once defined her life. This was exactly the kind of mission she had been trained for, the intersection of technical expertise and special operations that represented her unique value to the military. But it was also the kind of mission that had led to her current situation. The kind of operation that required choices that would haunt her long after the mission was complete. "What's the timeline?" she asked. 12 hours to infiltrate," Director Walsh replied. "The Chinese are rotating their security teams on a predictable schedule. We have a window of opportunity, but it closes quickly. Extraction route? Submarine pickup, 2 miles offshore. The USS Hampton is already in position." Sarah nodded, processing the operational parameters. It was a challenging mission, but not impossibly so. She had conducted similar operations in more hostile environments with less support. "What about backup?" she asked. The room fell silent. Captain Torres cleared his throat. "Sarah, you know how these operations work. If something goes wrong, if you're compromised, there's no official American presence in the area. No rescue mission, no diplomatic intervention." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had accepted those terms before, had operated in the gray spaces where American personnel officially didn't exist. But after months of recovery, after beginning to heal from the psychological wounds of her previous service, the prospect of returning to that level of isolation felt overwhelming. "I understand," she said quietly. "Do you?" Admiral Hawthorne asked. "Because I need to be certain that you're ready for this. Not just operationally, but personally. This mission will require you to be everything you were before, without the support systems that you've built for yourself here." Sarah thought about the maintenance badge, about the safe predictability of her recent life, about the careful distance she had maintained from the kinds of choices that define special operations. Then she thought about the alternative: American naval personnel operating blind while Chinese intelligence gathered their communications. Missions compromised before they began, sailors dying because critical information had been intercepted. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. Captain Torres smiled. "I thought you would be. Your equipment is being prepared now. Full technical suite, modified diving gear, and some new toys that should make the electronic warfare aspects more manageable." "One more thing," Admiral Hawthorne said. "When you return, and you will return, I want you to consider a permanent change in assignment. The Navy needs people like you in operational roles, not hiding in maintenance bays." Sarah understood that the Admiral was offering her a way back to her true calling, a chance to stop running from who she was and embrace the service that had defined her life. "Yes, ma'am," she said. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to disperse, Sarah felt the weight of the SEAL Trident against her chest. The maintenance badge had been a temporary shelter, but the storm was calling her back to the work she had been born to do. The next 12 hours would determine whether she was still the operator she had once been, or whether the healing process had changed her in ways that would affect her ability to complete the mission. But as she prepared to leave the briefing room, Sarah knew that she was about to find out who she really was, beneath all the carefully constructed defenses and protective identities. The maintenance technician was gone. The Navy SEAL was back. The equipment room felt like stepping back into a previous life. Sarah stood surrounded by gear that represented years of technological advancement in special operations, modified diving equipment with extended oxygen capacity, waterproof electronics packages, and communication devices that could maintain contact with command even in the most hostile environments. But it was the weapons that made her paws compact, precise, and designed for the kind of close-quarters combat that defined her specialty. Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, the base's senior equipment specialist, was methodically checking each piece of gear. Sarah had worked with Santos on previous operations, and the reunion was bittersweet. It represented a return to capabilities that Sarah had missed, but also acknowledgement that her peaceful interlude was ending. "How does it feel?" Santos asked, holding up the modified diving suit. "Getting back into the real gear?" Sarah ran her hands over the familiar equipment. The suit was a marvel of engineering, designed to provide protection and mobility in environments where both were matters of life and death. But more than that, it was a symbol of returning to work that mattered, to operations that could change the course of history. "Strange," Sarah admitted. "I'd almost forgotten how precise everything has to be." "It's like riding a bicycle," Santos said with a grin. "Except the bicycle is designed to keep you alive in situations where most people would die." The weapons check was more challenging than Sarah had expected. It had been months since she had handled operational firearms, and her muscle memory felt rusty. The compact assault rifle felt heavier than she remembered, and the specialized electronics required concentration that once had been automatic. "You're overthinking it," Santos observed. "Trust your training." "It's still there." Sarah nodded and focused on the fundamentals. Breathing, stance, sight alignment. The basics that had been drilled into her during months of training that felt like a lifetime ago. Gradually, the familiar rhythm returned. Her hands found their proper grip, her body found its balance, and the weapons became extensions of her will rather than foreign objects. The diving equipment was more comfortable. Sarah had always been at home in the water, and the modified suit felt like returning to a natural environment. The built-in communication systems, the enhanced mobility joints, the integrated tool packages, they all represented improvements on equipment she had used successfully in previous operations. "The Chinese installation," Santos said, pulling up technical schematics on a secure tablet. "Intelligence suggests it's a modified cargo vessel with electronic warfare equipment installed below deck. Your primary objective is to disable the surveillance systems without creating evidence of sabotage." Sarah studied the schematics. The vessel was larger than she had expected, with multiple levels and compartments, that would provide both opportunities and challenges. The surveillance equipment was located in the most secure section of the ship, protected by multiple layers of security that would require careful navigation. "How current is this intelligence?" Sarah asked. 48 hours old, Santos replied. "But the configuration shouldn't have changed significantly. The Chinese aren't expecting interference." Sarah continued studying the plans, her mind automatically calculating approach routes, contingency plans, and extraction scenarios. It was like flexing mental muscles that had been dormant for months, and she was surprised by how quickly the analytical framework returned. "Electronic countermeasures?" she asked. "They have basic security systems, but nothing that should challenge someone with your background. The real challenge will be the human factor security personnel who might detect your presence through observation rather than technology." Sarah nodded. Human intelligence was often more dangerous than electronic systems because it was less predictable, less controllable. But it was also something she had extensive experience managing. As the equipment check continued, Sarah became aware of activity elsewhere on the base. Through the equipment room's reinforced windows, she could see increased security patrols, additional checkpoints, and the kind of controlled urgency that preceded major operations. The base was preparing for something significant, and she was about to be at the center of it. "How much does the crew know?" Sarah asked. "Only what they need to know," Santos replied. "Admiral Hawthorne has been very careful about operational security. As far as most people are concerned, you're still a maintenance technician who's been reassigned to special duties." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. For months, she had been invisible to most of the base personnel, dismissed as just another support specialist. Now she was about to undertake a mission that could affect the strategic balance in the South China Sea, and most people still wouldn't know what she had done. "What about Martinez and his crew?" Sarah asked. "They've been pretty vocal about their opinions of maintenance personnel," Santos laughed. "That's going to be an interesting conversation when this is over." "Assuming you want to have it," Sarah considered the question. Martinez's dismissive attitude had been painful, but it had also been useful. It had provided cover for her recovery, allowed her to process her experiences without the pressure of living up to her reputation. But it had also been a reminder of how easily people could be categorized and dismissed based on superficial observations. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it's better to let people think what they want to think." That's very philosophical for someone who's about to infiltrate a Chinese naval installation, Santos observed. Sarah smiled. "Special operations teaches you to think about more than just the immediate tactical situation. Every mission has consequences that extend beyond the primary objective." The equipment check was nearly complete. Sarah had tested every system, verified every component, and confirmed that she was as prepared as training and technology could make her. But she knew that preparation was only part of the equation. The real test would come when she was alone in hostile territory, making decisions that could determine the success or failure of the mission. "Final briefing in 30 minutes, Santos said. "Admiral Hawthorne wants to go over the operational timeline one more time." Sarah nodded and continued her preparations. The maintenance badge was still in her pocket, a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. But the SEAL Trident was back where it belonged, displayed proudly on her operational uniform. As she prepared to leave the equipment room, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished surface of a weapons cabinet. The woman looking back at her was different from the maintenance technician who had been dismissed and overlooked for months. This was someone who had been trained for the most challenging missions, someone who had proven herself in the most dangerous environments. The transformation was complete. The maintenance worker was gone, and the Navy SEAL was ready to return to the work she had been born to do. The final briefing took place in the same secure conference room where Sarah had first learned about the mission. But now the atmosphere was different, more focused, more intense. charged with the kind of energy that preceded operations where failure was not an option. Admiral Hawthorne stood at the head of the table, her expression reflecting the gravity of what they were about to undertake. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Admiral began, "we are now 12 hours from mission initiation. Lieutenant Chen will be deployed via submarine to a position 2 miles from the target vessel. Her objective is to disable the electronic warfare capabilities without detection and extract via underwater recovery." Sarah studied the final intelligence updates displayed on the main screen. The Chinese vessel had maintained its position, but additional security measures had been implemented. Extra patrols, modified watch schedules, and what appeared to be enhanced perimeter detection systems. "The good news," Captain Torres said, "is that the modifications seem to be reactive rather than proactive. They're responding to general security concerns rather than specific intelligence about American operations. The bad news," Director Walsh added, "is that any modifications increase the risk of detection. The margin for error has become significantly smaller." Sarah absorbed the information without comment. In special operations, risk was a constant companion. The key was to acknowledge it, plan for it, and execute with the kind of precision that minimized its impact. Questions? "Admiral Hawthorne." Sarah raised her hand. "Rules of engagement?" "Avoid contact if possible," Captain Torres replied. "If contact is unavoidable, neutralize the threat with minimal noise and no permanent casualties if possible. This is a technical mission, not a combat operation." "Understood," Sarah said. "But if the mission is compromised?" "Complete the primary objective if possible," Admiral Hawthorne said. "The strategic value of disabling their surveillance capabilities outweighs other considerations." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah understood that she was being given authorization to prioritize mission success over personal safety, to make the kinds of sacrifices that special operations sometimes required. "Equipment final check in 4 hours, Santos announced. "Transportation to the submarine departs in 6 hours. As the meeting concluded, the participants began to disperse. But Admiral Hawthorne gestured for Sarah to remain. "A word, Lieutenant," she said. When they were alone, Admiral Hawthorne's expression softened slightly. "How are you feeling about this?" Sarah considered the question. "Ready, ma'am." "It feels right, like returning to something I was meant to do." "Good," the Admiral said. "Because I need you to understand something. This mission represents more than just a tactical operation. It's a statement about the capabilities of the American military, about our ability to respond to threats in ways that conventional forces cannot." Sarah nodded. "I understand the strategic implications. Do you? Because I want you to know that your performance on this mission will be noted at the highest levels. Success here could open doors that have been closed, could provide opportunities that extend far beyond your current assignment." The implication was clear. Admiral Hawthorne was offering Sarah a path back to the kind of operational roles that had defined her career before her breakdown, the kind of work that mattered on a global scale. "And if I fail?" Sarah asked. "You won't," Admiral Hawthorne said with conviction. "Because you're not the same person who requested maintenance duty 6 months ago. You've had time to heal, to process your experiences, to remember why you chose this path in the first place." Sarah felt a surge of something that might have been confidence or might have been determination. The Admiral was right. She had changed during her months of recovery. The maintenance work had provided more than just a safe haven. It had given her perspective on what it meant to serve, to contribute, to be part of something larger than herself. "There's something else," Admiral Hawthorne continued. "When you return from this mission successfully, I want you to consider a permanent change in assignment. The Navy needs people like you in operational roles, not hiding in support positions." The offer was tempting. Sarah had missed the intensity of special operations, the sense of purpose that came from missions. That could change the course of history. But she had also learned to value the kind of service that happened in the background, the work that kept the larger mission functioning. "Can I think about it?" Sarah asked. "Of course," Admiral Hawthorne said. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Sarah left the briefing room with her mind racing. The mission itself was challenging but manageable. The larger questions about her future, about what kind of person she wanted to be and what kind of service she wanted to provide, were more complex. She made her way back to her quarters, passing through corridors where she had been invisible for months. But now she noticed something different in how people looked at her. Word had apparently spread that she was involved in something significant, something that required the kind of clearances and capabilities that most personnel didn't possess. Was waiting for her outside her quarters, his expression unreadable. "Chun," he said, his voice lacking its usual condescending tone. "I heard you got reassigned to special duties." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of the mockery that had characterized their previous interactions. Instead, she found something that might have been respect or might have been curiosity. "Temporary assignment," she said diplomatically. "Right," Martinez said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe her. "Listen, I wanted to. Some of the things I said about maintenance personnel, about your work." Sarah waited, interested to see where this was going. "I may have been out of line," Martinez continued. "I didn't really understand what you were doing, what your background was." The apology, such as it was, represented a shift in how Sarah was being perceived. But it also highlighted the superficial nature of military hierarchy, the way people's opinions could change based on incomplete information. "No harm done," Sarah said. "Everyone's entitled to their opinions." "Yeah, well," Martinez said, "I'm starting to think my opinions might have been pretty stupid." As Sarah entered her quarters, she reflected on the conversation. Martinez's change in attitude was gratifying, but it also reminded her of how easily people could be dismissed and categorized. The maintenance badge had made her invisible. The special assignment was making her visible again, but visibility came with its own challenges. The mission she was about to undertake would require her to be invisible in a different way, to operate in hostile territory without detection. The skills were transferable, but the stakes were infinitely higher. Sarah began her final preparations, checking equipment one more time, reviewing mission parameters, and mentally preparing for the kind of operation that had once defined her life. The maintenance technician was gone, but the person who was taking her place was someone who had been shaped by both her original training and her recent experiences. The mission would begin in 6 hours. Sarah Chen was ready to remember who she really was. The USS Hampton cut through the dark waters of the South China Sea like a blade through silk. Sarah sat in the submarine's mission preparation compartment, surrounded by the familiar sounds of a vessel operating in stealth mode, the whisper of recycled air, the subtle hum of electrical systems, and the occasional creak of the hull adjusting to water pressure. It was a symphony she had heard many times before, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it was the soundtrack to her return to operational status. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, the Hampton's captain, had briefed Sarah on the approach route during the 6-hour journey to the target area. The submarine would surface briefly to deploy Sarah via Zodiac boat, then retreat to a safe distance to await the extraction signal. It was a routine that both women had executed multiple times, but the stakes made every detail critical. "Final equipment check," Chief Santos announced, though she had already verified every component 3 times. In special operations, redundancy was survival. Sarah ran through her gear one final time. The modified diving suit felt like a second skin, its integrated systems providing her with enhanced mobility and communication capabilities. The waterproof electronics package contained the specialized equipment, She would need to disable the Chinese surveillance systems. The compact weapons were clean, loaded, and secured in positions that would allow for quick access without compromising her stealth approach. But it was the small details that might make the difference. The modified rebreather that would leave no bubble trail. The sound-dampening modifications to her equipment that would reduce noise to barely detectable levels. The chemical analysis kit that would allow her to identify and counter any detection systems she might encounter. ETA to deployment position? Sarah asked. 47 minutes, Commander Rodriguez replied. Current intelligence shows the target. Vessel maintaining position. Security patrols following predictable patterns. Sarah nodded and began her mental preparation routine. Visualization of the approach route, review of contingency plans, and the kind of psychological preparation that allowed special operators to function effectively under extreme stress. She had learned during her recovery that mental preparation was as important as physical training, that the mind could be trained to remain calm and focused, even in life-threatening situations. The submarine's intercom crackled to life. All hands. Approaching deployment position. Prepare for silent running. The already quiet vessel became even quieter as non-essential systems were shut down, and the crew moved into the heightened alert status that preceded critical operations. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that marked the transition. From preparation to execution. Final intel update, Commander Rodriguez announced, consulting a secure tablet. Target vessel shows normal activity patterns. No indication of heightened security awareness. Weather conditions are optimal for infiltration. Sarah absorbed the information and continued her preparations. The mission was straightforward in concept, but complex in execution. Approach the target vessel undetected. Infiltrate the electronic warfare compartment. Disable the surveillance systems without leaving evidence of sabotage. And extract without being discovered. The challenge would be in the details. The Chinese vessel was a converted cargo ship with multiple levels and compartments. The electronic warfare equipment was located in the most secure section of the ship, protected by both physical barriers and human security. Sarah would need to navigate through multiple layers of defense while maintaining complete stealth. 30 minutes to deployment. Santos announced. Sarah began her final mental preparations. She reviewed the layout of the target vessel, visualized her approach route, and mentally rehearsed the technical procedures she would need to disable the surveillance equipment. But more than that, she prepared herself for the psychological challenges of operating alone in hostile territory. The months of recovery had taught her important lessons about managing stress and maintaining focus under pressure. The maintenance work had provided her with a different perspective on service and contribution. But now she needed to integrate those lessons with the operational skills that had made her effective in special operations. Personal question, Commander Rodriguez said, sitting down beside Sarah. How does it feel to be back in operational mode? Sarah considered the question. Different than I expected. I thought it would be like returning to something familiar. But it feels more like evolution. Like I'm bringing something new to the work. That's probably a good thing, Rodriguez observed. Experience changes us, makes us better at what we do. Or it makes us more aware of the costs, Sarah replied. Submarine's deck began to vibrate slightly as they approached the surface. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of transition, the moment when the vessel moved from the safety of the deep ocean to the exposure of surface operations. Final systems check, Santos announced. Sarah verified her equipment one last time. Communication. Systems operational. Navigation equipment calibrated. Weapons secured but accessible. Electronic warfare tools properly configured. Everything was as ready as training and technology could make it. 10 minutes to deployment. Commander Rodriguez announced. Sarah moved to the deployment hatch and began her final preparations. Zodiac boat was already prepared. its silent electric motor designed to minimize noise and detection. The approach route had been calculated to take advantage of current, patterns, and blind spots in the target vessel's security perimeter. "Good luck," Santos said, her voice carrying the weight of shared experience and mutual respect. Sarah nodded and prepared to enter the Zodiac. The mission was about to begin, and she was ready to discover whether the person she had become during her recovery was capable of the kind of operational excellence that the mission required. The submarine's hatch opened, revealing the dark waters of the South China Sea. Sarah could see the distant lights of the Chinese vessel, her target for the next few hours. The maintenance technician was gone, left behind in the safety of Naval Base San Diego. The person who was about to enter hostile territory was someone who had been shaped by both her original training and her recent experiences. The mission was about to begin, and Sarah Chen was ready to remember who she really was. The Zodiac boat moved through the dark waters with barely a whisper, its electric motor producing no more sound than the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Sarah lay flat against the bottom of the small craft, her body becoming one with the equipment that would either ensure her success or mark her failure. The Chinese vessel loomed ahead, its lights reflecting off the water like stars that had fallen to earth. Sarah's training took over as she approached the target. Every detail became sharp, focused, catalogued for potential significance. The rhythm of the patrol boats circling the main vessel, the timing of the spotlight sweeps, the positioning of the guard posts that were visible from water level. It was like reading a language that she had learned years ago and was now remembering fluently. The approach route took her beneath the vessel's stern, where the massive propellers created a blind spot in their surveillance coverage. Sarah secured the Zodiac to the ship's anchor chain with specialized equipment that would allow for quick release during her extraction. The sound of the waves against the hull would mask any noise she might make during her ascent, the climb up. The anchor chain was more challenging than she had anticipated. Months of maintenance work had kept her physically fit, but the specialized muscle memory required for this kind of infiltration felt rusty. Her hands found their grip, her body found its rhythm, and she began the careful ascent toward the deck level. The first real test came when she reached the point where she would need to transition from the anchor chain to the ship's hull. This was the moment of maximum exposure, when she would be visible to anyone who happened to be looking in the right direction. Sarah timed her movement to coincide with the sweep of the patrol boat's spotlight, using the darkness that followed to make her transition. The ship's hull was wet and slippery, but Sarah's equipment included specialized grips that provided secure handholds. She moved with the kind of deliberate precision that had been drilled into her during months of training, each movement calculated to minimize noise and maximize efficiency. The deck level presented new challenges. Sarah could hear the sounds of human activity, conversations in Chinese, the movement of equipment, the routine sounds of a vessel operating in a heightened state of alert. She needed to find a way to access the lower levels where the electronic warfare equipment was located without being detected by the human security elements. The maintenance shaft that intelligence had identified as her primary access route was located on the port side of the vessel, concealed behind a ventilation housing. Sarah made her way across the deck using the shadows cast by the ship's superstructure, moving when the patrol patterns created windows of opportunity. The shaft was exactly where intelligence had indicated, but it was smaller than she had expected. Sarah would need to remove some of her equipment to fit through the opening, then retrieve it once she was inside. This created additional risk, but it was manageable with proper planning and execution. The descent through the maintenance shaft was claustrophobic and disorienting. Sarah had to rely on her equipment's navigation systems to maintain her sense of direction as she moved through the ship's internal structure. The sounds of the vessel's operations were amplified in the confined space, creating an acoustic environment that was both helpful and challenging. The electronic warfare compartment was located 3 levels below the main deck, in a section of the ship that had been extensively modified for its current purpose. Sarah could hear the distinctive sounds of high-powered electronic equipment, the whine of cooling systems, the hum of power supplies, and the subtle electromagnetic interference that indicated sophisticated surveillance systems. The compartment security was exactly as intelligence had described: electronic locks, motion sensors, and what appeared to be a human guard stationed outside the main entrance. Sarah would need to bypass all of these systems without triggering any alarms or alerting the security personnel. The electronic lock was the first challenge. Sarah's equipment included specialized tools designed to defeat common security systems without leaving evidence of tampering. The lock yielded to her ministrations after several tense minutes, but she knew that the real challenges lay ahead. The motion sensors were more sophisticated than she had expected. Sarah's suit included countermeasures designed to defeat standard detection systems, but these sensors appeared to be military-grade equipment that might require more advanced techniques. She spent precious time analyzing the sensor configuration before identifying a pattern that would allow her to navigate through the compartment without triggering alarms. The electronic warfare equipment itself was impressive: banks of servers, communication arrays, and what appeared to be artificial intelligence systems designed to analyze and interpret intercepted communications. Sarah understood that she was looking at technology that could potentially compromise every American military communication in the region. The sabotage had to be subtle, designed to cause system failures that would appear to be equipment malfunctions rather than hostile action. Sarah's training in electronic warfare and her experience with maintenance systems provided her with the knowledge she needed to identify the critical components and the methods that would disable them most effectively. Working quickly but carefully, Sarah began implementing the technical procedures that would neutralize the Chinese surveillance capabilities. Each modification was designed to cause progressive system failures over a period of hours, giving her time to extract before the sabotage was discovered. But as she worked, Sarah became aware of sounds that suggested increased activity elsewhere on the vessel. Footsteps in the corridors, radio communications in urgent tones, and what sounded like additional security personnel being deployed. Something had changed, and she needed to complete her mission and begin extraction immediately. The final system modifications were completed with minutes to spare. Sarah began her withdrawal from the electronic warfare compartment, retracing her route through the ship's internal structure. But as she reached the maintenance shaft that would take her back to the deck level, she heard sounds that made her blood freeze. Someone was coming down the shaft from above. Sarah was trapped in the heart of a Chinese naval vessel, with hostile personnel approaching from her planned escape route. The mission was complete, but extraction had suddenly become a matter of survival. The maintenance technician would have panicked, but the Navy SEAL who had taken her place began calculating alternatives, preparing for the kind of close-quarters combat that her training had prepared her for. The real test was about to begin. The sound of boots on metal rungs echoed through the maintenance shaft with increasing urgency. Sarah pressed herself against the wall of the service corridor, her mind racing through contingency plans that had seemed theoretical during the mission briefing. The Chinese security personnel were conducting what appeared to be a routine patrol, but their timing couldn't have been worse. Sarah's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. She had three options: attempt to hide until the patrol passed, try to neutralize the approaching personnel silently, or find an alternative escape route. The confined space of the maintenance shaft made hiding nearly impossible, and combat would compromise the covert nature of the mission. That left option 3, improvisation. The ship's technical drawings, memorized during her preparation, revealed an alternative route through the vessel's air conditioning system. It would be more challenging and time-consuming, but it would allow her to avoid contact with the security patrol. Sarah began moving toward the access point, her movements silent and deliberate. The ductwork was even more cramped than the maintenance shaft. But Sarah's training in confined space operations allowed her to navigate through the system with relative efficiency. The sounds of the ship's operations were muffled here, replaced by the steady flow of air and the occasional vibration of the ventilation equipment. As she moved through the ductwork, Sarah could hear the security patrol reaching the electronic warfare compartment. Their voices carried through the ship's structure, and while she couldn't understand the Chinese conversation, the tone suggested routine inspection rather than emergency response. Her sabotage hadn't been detected yet, but it was only a matter of time. The HVAC system provided access to multiple levels of the ship, and Sarah used this to her advantage. Instead of heading directly to the deck level, she made her way to the ship's engineering section, where the noise of the machinery would help mask her movement and the complexity of the systems would provide additional cover. The engineering section was a maze of pipes, conduits, and machinery that created both opportunities and challenges. Sarah could move with more freedom here, but she also risked encountering maintenance personnel or security patrols. Her approach had to balance speed with stealth, efficiency with caution. Sarah's months of maintenance work proved unexpectedly valuable as she navigated through the Chinese vessel's engineering systems. The layout was different from American ships, but the fundamental principles were the same. She could read the purpose of each system, understand the flow of power and fluids, and use that knowledge to move through the space without triggering alarms or creating disturbances. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the engineering section made Sarah freeze. Two voices were approaching, speaking in rapid Chinese. Through a gap in the machinery, she could see two crew members conducting what appeared to be a routine inspection. Their body language suggested boredom rather than alertness, which meant they weren't aware of any security breach. Sarah waited in the shadows as the inspection continued. The crew members moved through the engineering section with practiced efficiency, checking gauges, noting readings, and ensuring that all systems were operating within normal parameters. Their presence added time pressure to her extraction, but it also provided useful intelligence about the ship's operational routine. When the inspection team moved on, Sarah resumed her movement toward the deck level. The route through the engineering section had added precious minutes to her escape, but it had also allowed her to avoid the security personnel, who were still investigating the lower levels. The transition from the engineering section to the deck level required careful timing. Sarah had to cross several corridors that were patrolled by security personnel, and her movement had to be coordinated with the patrol patterns that she had observed during her initial infiltration. The deck level presented the final challenge of her extraction. Sarah needed to reach the point where she had secured her Zodiac boat, but the area was now illuminated by additional lighting that hadn't been present during her approach. The Chinese security posture had been elevated, though not to the level that would suggest awareness of her presence. Sarah used the ship's superstructure to provide cover as she made her way toward the stern. The shadows cast by the deck equipment created a maze of concealment opportunities, but they also required precise timing to navigate safely. Each movement had to be calculated to avoid the overlapping fields of view from the guard positions. The Zodiac boat was exactly where she had left it, secured to the anchor chain and invisible from the deck level. But reaching it required Sarah to expose herself during the descent, creating the highest risk moment of her entire extraction. She timed her movement to coincide with the patrol boat's position, using its spotlight as a distraction while she made her way down the anchor chain. The descent was faster than the ascent had been. Aided by gravity and urgency, Sarah reached the Zodiac and began her departure procedures, releasing the securing lines and activating the silent motor that would carry her away from the Chinese vessel. The mission was complete, but she wouldn't be truly safe until she reached the recovery point where the USS Hampton was waiting. As she moved away from the target vessel, Sarah activated her communication equipment and transmitted the success signal to the submarine. The electronic warfare systems had been disabled, the sabotage was undetectable, and she was extracting without compromise. From an operational standpoint, the mission was a complete success, but as she piloted the Zodiac through the dark waters toward the recovery point, Sarah reflected on what the mission had meant for her personally. The months of maintenance work had provided her with a different perspective on service and contribution, but they had also been a form of hiding from the reality of who she was and what she was capable of. The successful completion of this mission proved that she was still operationally effective, that her skills hadn't deteriorated during her recovery period. But more than that, it demonstrated that her experiences during recovery had actually enhanced her capabilities, providing her with additional perspectives and skills that made her a more complete operator. The Zodiac's navigation system indicated that she was approaching the recovery point. Sarah could see the subtle disturbance in the water that marked the submarine's periscope, and she felt the relief that came with successful extraction. She had returned to operational status and proven that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The maintenance badge had served its purpose, providing cover and protection during a period of healing and growth. But the SEAL Trident represented her true identity, her real contribution to the mission that she had sworn to serve. As the USS Hampton's recovery system pulled her aboard, Sarah knew that she had successfully navigated the transition from hiding to serving, from protection to contribution. The mission was complete, but in many ways, her real journey was just beginning. The return journey aboard the USS Hampton felt different from the outbound voyage. Sarah sat in the submarine's debriefing compartment, still wearing her operational gear, while Commander Rodriguez and her intelligence officer documented every aspect of the mission. The successful infiltration and sabotage of the Chinese electronic warfare platform represented a significant tactical victory, but Sarah understood that the real implications were only beginning to unfold. The technical execution was flawless, the intelligence officer noted, reviewing Sarah's mission report. The sabotage will appear to be equipment failure, and the progressive nature of the system degradation will delay their understanding of what actually happened. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already moving beyond the immediate tactical success to the larger strategic implications. The Chinese would eventually discover that their surveillance capabilities had been compromised, and they would implement countermeasures to prevent future infiltrations. The intelligence advantage was temporary, but it could be decisive if properly exploited. Estimated timeline until discovery? Commander Rodriguez asked. 48 to 72 hours, Sarah replied. The systems will appear to be suffering from multiple independent failures. By the time they realize its sabotage, we'll have had time to exploit the intelligence gap. The debriefing continued for several hours, with Sarah providing detailed information about the Chinese vessel security procedures, equipment configurations, and operational patterns. Each detail would be analyzed and incorporated into intelligence assessments that would inform future operations in the region. But as the submarine made its way back to Naval Base San Diego, Sarah found herself thinking less about the tactical aspects of the mission and more about what it meant for her future. The successful operation had proven that she was ready to return to operational status, but it had also raised questions about what kind of service she wanted to provide. Admiral Hawthorne's offer of a permanent return to special operations was appealing. The work was challenging, important, and aligned with her unique skills and training. But Sarah had also learned valuable lessons during her months in maintenance. Lessons about service, contribution, and the importance of all the elements that kept the larger mission functioning. The communication from Naval Base San Diego came through the submarine secure channels 8 hours into the return journey. Admiral Hawthorne's message was brief but significant. Mission success confirmed. Intelligence exploitation already producing results. Prepare for immediate reassignment upon return. Sarah understood that her period of recovery was officially over. The maintenance badge that had provided her with cover and protection for months would be replaced by assignments that reflected her true capabilities and experience. But she also understood that she had a choice to make about what kind of operator she wanted to be going forward. The submarine surfaced as they approached San Diego Bay, and Sarah could see the familiar skyline of the naval base. It looked different now than it had when she left, or perhaps she was seeing it differently. The maintenance facilities where she had spent months recovering were still there, but they no longer represented hiding or diminished capacity. They represented a different kind of service, equally important but often unrecognized. As the USS Hampton docked, Sarah prepared herself for the transition back to visibility. The successful mission would be noted at the highest levels of the military hierarchy, and her name would be associated with operational success rather than maintenance duties. But she had learned during her recovery that recognition could be as challenging as invisibility in its own way. The debriefing at Naval Base San Diego was more extensive than the preliminary session aboard the submarine. Admiral Hawthorne, Captain Torres, Director Walsh, and several other officials Sarah didn't recognize participated in a comprehensive review of every aspect of the operation. The mission's success had apparently exceeded expectations, and the intelligence gathered was already being used to coordinate additional operations in the region. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," Admiral Hawthorne said as the formal debriefing concluded. "The kind of performance that reminds us why we invest so heavily in special operations training." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she found herself thinking about the broader implications of the mission's success. The Chinese electronic warfare platform had been neutralized, but similar threats would emerge. The intelligence advantage was temporary, but the need for operators with her skills was ongoing. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I'm glad I could contribute to the mission's success." "About that," Admiral Hawthorne said, "I meant what I said about permanent reassignment. Your performance on this operation demonstrates that you're ready for full operational status. I'm prepared to offer you a position with Naval Special Warfare Development Group, working on operations that would make this mission look routine." The offer was everything that Sarah had once wanted. Elite assignment, challenging missions, the opportunity to serve at the highest levels of special operations. But as she considered the Admiral's words, Sarah realized that her priorities had evolved during her months of recovery. "That's a generous offer, Admiral," Sarah said carefully. "But I'd like to request some time to consider my options." Admiral Hawthorne looked surprised. "Options?" "Lieutenant, this is the kind of opportunity that most special operators spend their entire careers hoping for." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah agreed. "And I appreciate that. But I've learned some things about service during my time in maintenance that I'd like to integrate with my special operations experience. I'm wondering if there might be ways to contribute that combine both skill sets." The Admiral studied Sarah with increased interest. "Explain." Sarah took a breath, organizing her thoughts. "Special operations tend to focus on immediate tactical objectives, but the maintenance experience taught me about the importance of long-term sustainability, about building and maintaining the systems that support multiple missions over time. I'm wondering if there's a way to combine those perspectives." "Admiral." Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment, considering Sarah's words. "That's an interesting perspective. What did you have in mind?" "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted. "But I'd like the opportunity to explore it." The Admiral nodded slowly. "Very well. Take some time to think about it. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't stay open indefinitely." As Sarah left the debriefing, she understood that she was facing a decision that would define her future service. The successful mission had proven that she was ready to return to operational status, but it had also opened up possibilities that she hadn't previously considered. The maintenance badge was gone, but the lessons it had taught her would remain. The SEAL Trident represented capabilities that would always be part of her identity. The challenge now was to find a way to integrate both into a form of service that honored all aspects of her experience. 3 weeks after her successful mission, Sarah stood once again in the corridors of Naval Base San Diego, but everything had changed. The maintenance coveralls had been replaced by dress blues, the dismissive glances had become respectful nods, and the invisible technician had become a recognized operator whose reputation preceded her through every interaction. Martinez approached her in the main corridor, his demeanor completely transformed from their previous encounters. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, coming to attention. "I wanted to apologize for my previous comments about maintenance personnel. I had no idea about your background or capabilities." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity or mere political correctness. What she found was genuine embarrassment and what appeared to be authentic respect. "No apology necessary, Petty Officer Martinez. Everyone's entitled to their opinions." "Maybe," Martinez said, "but my opinions were based on ignorance. I've been thinking about what you said, about everyone's job mattering, about the ship not running without every part working together. I think I understand it better now." The conversation was interrupted by Chief Santos, who approached with a folder of documents. "Lieutenant, Admiral Hawthorne wants to see you in her office. Something about your decision regarding reassignment." Sarah nodded and made her way to the Admiral's office, her mind focused on the choice she had been contemplating for weeks. Offer of assignment to Naval Special Warfare Development Group remained open, representing the pinnacle of Special Operations career progression. But Sarah had been exploring other possibilities, options that would allow her to integrate her operational experience with the lessons she had learned during her recovery. Admiral Hawthorne was reviewing personnel files when Sarah entered, but she looked up with an expression of interest and curiosity. "Lieutenant Chen, have you reached a decision about your future assignment?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I have a proposal that I'd like you to consider. I'm listening." Sarah took a breath and presented the idea she had been developing. "I'd like to propose the creation of a new position that combines special operations capabilities with technical systems expertise. A role that would involve both operational missions and the development of the technical infrastructure that supports special operations." Admiral Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, considering the proposal. "Explain the operational concept." "Special operations tend to focus on immediate tactical objectives," Sarah began, "but they're increasingly dependent on technical systems that require long-term maintenance and development. I'm proposing a role that would bridge that gap, ensuring that our operational capabilities are supported by robust, reliable, and continuously improving technical infrastructure." The Admiral nodded slowly. "And you see this as combining your operational experience with your maintenance background?" "Yes, ma'am. The maintenance experience taught me about the importance of sustainability, reliability, and preventive care. The operational experience taught me about performance under pressure and mission-critical decision-making. I think there's value in combining those perspectives." Admiral Hawthorne was quiet for several minutes, considering the proposal. "You know, we've been struggling with exactly those kinds of challenges. Our special operations capabilities are advancing rapidly, but our support systems sometimes lag behind. Having someone who understands both sides of the equation could be valuable." "I believe it could be, ma'am." "Very well," Admiral Hawthorne said. "I'm willing to approve a pilot program. 6 months to develop the concept and demonstrate its value. If it works, we'll consider making it a permanent position. If it doesn't, you'll have to choose between special operations and technical support." Sarah felt a surge of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity represented exactly what she had been hoping for, but it also carried the risk of failure. In a highly visible position. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't disappoint you." "I don't think you will," Admiral Hawthorne said. "But I have one condition." I want you to wear both insignia. The SEAL Trident and a modified maintenance badge that reflects your technical expertise. I want people to see that excellence can take many forms. The symbolism wasn't lost on Sarah. For months, she had hidden the SEAL Trident beneath the maintenance badge, using one identity to conceal another. Now she was being asked to wear both openly, to represent the integration of different forms of service, rather than the supremacy of one over another. Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored. As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The maintenance badge had been intended as temporary cover, a way of hiding while she recovered from the psychological wounds of special operations. But it had become something more important, a reminder that service took many forms, that contribution could be measured in different ways, and that excellence wasn't defined by visibility or recognition. The successful mission had proven that she was ready to return to operational status, but her experiences during recovery had taught her that true effectiveness came from understanding all aspects of the mission, not just the most dramatic or visible parts. Sarah made her way back through the corridors of the base, noting how different her perspective had become. The maintenance personnel she passed were no longer invisible to her. She understood the critical nature of their work, the skill required for their responsibilities, and the importance of their contribution to the larger mission. Martinez was waiting for her near the communication center, apparently hoping for another conversation. "Lieutenant," he said, "I wanted to ask you something. During the time you were working maintenance, did you ever think about telling people about your real background?" Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes. But I learned that there's value in being underestimated, in being able to observe and contribute without the weight of expectations or assumptions." "That's a pretty sophisticated way to think about it," Martinez observed. "Maybe," Sarah said. "Or maybe it's just recognizing that everyone's job matters, regardless of whether it gets recognition or not." As she walked away, Sarah touched the spot on her chest where both insignia would soon rest. The SEAL Trident represented capabilities earned through grueling training and proven in hostile environments. The maintenance badge represented lessons learned through service that was less dramatic but equally important. Together, they would represent a new kind of service, one that honored both the warrior and the technician, both the operator and the supporter. Sarah Chen had found her way back to who she was meant to be, but she had also discovered new aspects of herself that would shape her service for years to come. The journey from dismissal to recognition was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.